The aluminum ladder feels cold in my hands, a strange contrast to the warm tar smell rising from the driveway as I realize my plan is already in motion. It began this morning. I was in my workshop, the one I built behind the small house my wife and I shared for 40 years. The air smelled of cut pine and machine oil. Adrian, my son-in-law, had stopped by to check on me. He leaned against my workbench, his expensive shoes looking ridiculous on the concrete floor. He picked up a small wooden bird I was carving, turning it over in his soft hands. He always had soft hands, even when he worked in finance. "You know, Ernest," he said, placing the bird down with a dismissive tap. "You shouldn't be cooped up in here all day. It's not good for you." His concern was a thin coat of paint on a rotten board. He was looking past me, his eyes scanning the neatly organized tools on the pegboard walls, the heavy equipment in the corners. He wasn't looking at me. He was taking inventory. It was the same look he had when he appraised my daughter's jewelry after she passed. "I like it in here," I said simply, wiping my hands on a rag. "It keeps my mind busy." I mentioned I needed to return his extension ladder, the one he loaned me last month. "No rush," he said, waving a hand. "Keep it as long as you need. What's mine is yours, you know?" The words hung in the air, tasting like rust. He wanted something, and it was never something small. He asked if I had my estate paperwork in order. The question was too casual. I told him everything was handled years ago. He nodded, a little too eagerly. "Good, good. Just making sure you're protected." He left a few minutes later, the roar of his luxury car engine disrupting the quiet of my street. I stood at the door of my workshop and watched him go. Protected. That was a word people like Adrian used when they were about to do something you needed protection from. The feeling sat like a cold stone in my gut all afternoon. I knew then I would have to check the locked file cabinet, the one with the old POA, dated 2018 inside. So a few hours later, I loaded his ladder into my old pickup. The drive to his neighborhood is always a strange experience. The houses are enormous, set back from the road behind pristine lawns and ornate iron gates. The air itself feels different, scrubbed clean of struggle. His house was the biggest on the block, a modern monstrosity of glass and white stone that looked more like a corporate headquarters than a home. It felt cold even under the strong afternoon sun. As I pulled up to the gate, I saw it, tucked away behind a row of manicured hedges, almost completely hidden from the street, was my late wife's sedan. A sensible, 10-year-old car she had loved. There was no mistaking the small dent on the rear bumper from a runaway shopping cart, or the faded sticker for the local garden club on the window. My heart hammered against my ribs. Adrian had told me it was in long-term storage. That was too painful to see. Why was it here? Why hide it? I killed the engine a few houses down the road and got out, leaving the ladder in the truck bed. I walked back, keeping to the sidewalk. The scent of fresh-cut grass was thick in the air, mixed with the summer heat radiating from the pavement. The neighborhood was silent, except for the distant hum of a pool filter. I felt like an intruder in a world I didn't belong to, a world my daughter had married into. I slipped behind the very hedges where the car was hidden. They were thick and tall, providing perfect cover. I could see the car clearly now, gleaming in the dappled sunlight. And I could hear voices carrying from the stone patio on the other side of the gate. Adrian's voice, smooth and confident, and another man's, rougher, with a wheezing laugh. I crouched down, the branches scratching at my arms. I didn't move. I just listened. "The old man bought it completely," Adrian was saying, "swallowed the whole just checking on you routine. He has no idea." The other man chuckled. "They never do. They get to a certain age and just want to be left alone. It makes them easy." I recognized the voice then. It was a neighbor of his, a man who called himself a fixer, someone who bent rules and cut corners for a fee. He was known for making problems disappear and opportunities appear. "So the power of attorney is solid?" the fixer asked. I felt the chill despite the heat. My mind flashed to the document my wife and I had signed back in 2018 when she first got sick. It was a springing POA, meant to activate only if I became incapacitated. A safeguard, a trust. It was not a weapon. "It's perfect," Adrian replied with smug satisfaction. "He thinks it's just for medical stuff. He has no clue it covers property transactions." "And the property? Lot 7, Block C. That's the adjacent parcel, right?" "The empty one," the fixer clarified. "That's the one," Adrian confirmed. "Worthless on its own, but combined with his workshop lot, the value skyrockets. A developer is already interested. They'll pay a premium for the combined footprint. We just need to get his signature on the transfer, or, use the authority we already have." The casual cruelty of his words took my breath away. He was talking about my life's work. My workshop. The place I built with my own two hands. The place I retreated to after my wife passed. It was more than a building. It was my sanctuary. And the adjacent lot, Lot 7, Block C, was our buffer. The green space my wife had tended as her garden for 30 years. She had made me promise never to sell it. "It's our piece, Ernest," she'd say. Now, Adrian was planning to pave it over for a profit. The fixer grunted. "What's the initial offer you're floating to him, to make it look good?" $42,500, Adrian said. A lowball, but enough to sound legitimate to a retiree. He'll see the number and think it's a windfall. Once he signs that, we use the POA to consolidate the titles and push through the full sale. He'll never know what hit him until the bulldozers arrive. A cold, precise rage began to build in my chest. And that's when I discovered their real treachery, the part that was not just about business, but about pure spite. "What about the car?" the fixer asked, his voice lower. "Why is it still here? That seems like a loose end." I held my breath. Adrian laughed, a short, ugly sound. "That's the beauty of it. He thinks it's in storage. I told him I'd handle it. I've already got a buyer for it, a private collector who likes the model. Another few grand he'll never know he had. It's perfect. We drain everything, piece by piece, and he'll be none the wiser." They were selling her car. The one she drove to the farmer's market every Saturday. The one where I could still almost smell her perfume. They weren't just stealing from me, they were erasing her. The rage I felt was no longer hot. It turned into something cold, something hard, sharp, like a piece of steel. They thought I was a relic, an old piece of furniture to be sold off with the rest of the estate. They were Rome. I stayed crouched in the hedges for another 10 minutes, listening to them finalize their plans. They spoke of deadlines, of forged signatures, if necessary, of how to transfer the money offshore before I could notice. Every word was a nail in a coffin they were building for me. But I've built things my whole life. I know how to take them apart, screw by screw, wire by wire, and I know how to find the load-bearing walls. Slowly, carefully, I backed out of the hedges. I didn't make a sound. I walked back to my truck, my movements deliberate and steady. My hands were not shaking. My breathing was even. The shock had burned away, leaving behind a terrible clarity. I got into the cab, the worn seat of familiar comfort. I didn't start the engine right away. I just sat there, looking at my own reflection in the rearview mirror. The face looking back was old, but the eyes were not. I drove home, taking the long way, letting the plan form in my mind. It was a schematic, a wiring diagram of cause and effect. They had given me all the components, the POA dated 2018, the specific lot number, the dollar amount, their timeline. They had handed me the blueprints to their own destruction. They thought they were building a trap, but an electrician knows better than anyone how to reverse the polarity and redirect the current. The shock they were planning would be going the other way. When I got back to my workshop, the smell of pine and oil was a comfort. This was my ground, my territory. The first thing I did was go to the old metal filing cabinet in the corner. It was locked, as always. My wife was the one who kept the key, but I knew her hiding places. I reached under the lip of the heavy wooden workbench, and my fingers found the small magnetic box she had placed there decades ago. It was still there. Inside, the small brass key was cool to the touch. The lock turned with a satisfying click. I pulled open the drawer marked Personal. The files were old, but perfectly organized. I found the folder I was looking for immediately. It was thick, sealed with documents from the past decade. Wills, deeds, titles. And there it was, a crisp document stapled together. Durable power of attorney. Effective upon incapacitation. I spread it out on the workbench, under the bright task light. I read every word, my eyes tracing the dense legal language. Adrian was right. The language was broader than I remembered, a standard template a lawyer had provided. It gave the agent, my son-in-law, sweeping powers over financial and real estate transactions. But it was conditional. The fee was the trigger, a declaration of my incapacitation by 2 physicians. They hadn't done that. They couldn't, which meant they were either planning to forge that, or they were hoping I wouldn't read the fine print. I felt a surge of relief, but it was short-lived. They had a plan. The fixer was involved. They wouldn't let a detail like that stop them. They would find a way. A crooked doctor, a forged letter. I couldn't rely on that clause alone. I needed to act first. I needed to cut the power at the source. The document was an instrument of trust. That trust was broken. Therefore, the instrument had to be voided, immediately. Without their knowledge, I picked up a stray piece of wire from my bench and bent it into a familiar shape. Something I hadn't done in years. It was a bent paper clip, really. But the shape was specific. A makeshift key for a simple lock. It reminded me of my early days as an apprentice, getting into locked junction boxes when a foreman misplaced the keys. It was a tool of access, a problem solver. I looked at the simple metal shape in my palm. They thought they held all the keys. They didn't know I could make my own. I set it down next to the POA document. My next step was to find my own lawyer, not the family lawyer who had drafted this POA. He was a friend of Adrian's father. I needed someone with no connections, someone sharp and discreet. I went to my computer, the old desktop humming quietly in the corner of the workshop office. I didn't search for local lawyers. I searched for the most aggressive estate litigation attorneys in the state capital, 3 hours away. I wanted a shark, not a guppy. I found a firm with a reputation for being relentless. I read their case studies. They specialized in elder financial abuse in contested estates. It was perfect. I sent a brief, encrypted email from a new, anonymous account. Urgent consultation needed regarding fraudulent use of a 2018 power of attorney document. Time sensitive. I didn't use my name. I just provided a burner phone number. Within 20 minutes, I got a reply. Call this number. Ask for Ms. Albright. Point. The phone call was short and direct. Ms. Albright's voice was calm and professional. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. I explained the situation in spare, factual terms. The overheard conversation, the specific assets at stake, the names involved. I told her about the POA and my suspicion that they would attempt to use it fraudulently. She listened without interruption. When I finished, there was a brief pause on the line. Then she spoke, her voice like ice. "Mr. Ernest," she said, somehow already knowing my name. "The first thing we do is a revocation. I can draft a notice of revocation and have it couriered to your son-in-law and all relevant financial institutions by tomorrow morning. He will be legally notified that his authority is terminated, effective immediately. We will file it with the county clerk's office at 8 a.m. sharp. He will have no power." It was a start, but it wasn't enough. I needed more than a defense. "That's good," I said. "But I don't want him to know I'm onto him." "Not yet. Is there a way to file the revocation without serving him notice immediately?" Miss Albright paused again. "That is unusual, but legally possible. We file it with the clerk, making it a public record and legally binding. The service of notice can be delayed. Strategically, it would mean he would be acting without authority, and any action he takes would be null and void. and illegal. That's the one, I said. Let him walk into the trap he set for me. I could almost hear her smile through the phone. I see, she said. You want to give him enough rope. Very well. I'll have the revocation filed first thing. What's your next move? I looked around my workshop, at the tools that represented a lifetime of methodical, patient work. My plan wasn't just about stopping Adrian. It was about exposing him. It was about evidence. I need to know what they do next, I told her. They think I'm ignorant. I want them to proceed. I want to document every illegal step they take after that revocation is filed. I thought about the conversation I overheard, the casual way they plotted. The law was one thing. Justice was another. I needed them to believe their plan was working perfectly, right up until the moment it collapsed on top of them. I needed to bait the hook. I told Ms. Albright my plan, pulling security camera footage from the county cameras on the street, placing a small, high-fidelity audio recorder under the porch rail near where they were talking, gathering proof of their conspiracy. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "This is an aggressive strategy, Mr. Ernest. Are you prepared for it?" I looked at the photo of my wife on my desk. "I've been preparing for 69 years," I said. The next 48 hours were a study in precision. I acquired a digital audio recorder, no bigger than my thumb with a magnetic backing. At my workbench, I carefully weatherproofed the device using a non-conductive sealant and a small rubber casing. It was the kind of detail work I had done for decades, protecting sensitive circuits from the elements. This was no different. I was protecting my life from a creditor I had foolishly let into my home. Miss Albright worked in parallel. She filed a request with the county for all security footage from Adrian Street, citing a potential property crime investigation. The request was sealed. Adrian would not be notified. The wheels of the law were turning, silent and invisible, grinding slowly, but with immense force. It was a machine, and I was learning how to operate it from the quiet of my workshop. Every action I took was deliberate, a step in a larger schematic. Then, on the third day, Adrian called. His voice was smooth, oozing the false concern that now sounded like poison in my ear. "Ernest, just checking in. How are you feeling?" I made my voice sound a little tired, a little frail. "Oh, getting by, Adrian. Same as always." Good, he said quickly. "Listen, I've been thinking about what we discussed. Your workload, the upkeep on the properties. I have a proposal for you that I think will really help." He laid it out just as I had overheard. An offer from a small developer to buy the workshop and the empty lot. A chance for me to have a nice nest egg, to relax, to travel. He made it sound like an act of profound generosity. He mentioned the figure, $42,500, as if he were bestowing a great gift upon me. The number was an insult, a clear sign of his contempt for my intelligence. He saw me as a problem to be managed. I played my part. I feigned confusion. I asked questions about taxes. I sounded hesitant. "That's a lot of money," I said, letting a little awe creep into my voice. "I don't know, Adrian. It's all happened so fast." "Don't you worry about a thing, Ernest," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "I'll handle all the paperwork. You just think about what you'll do with the money." I told him I needed a day to consider it. This was my opening. The next afternoon, I called him back. "Adrian," I said, "I'll do it. I think you're right. It's for the best." I could hear the triumphant smile in his voice. "That's great news, Ernest. Really great." Then I added the bait. "By the way, I still have that big ladder of yours in my truck. I can drop it off this afternoon on my way to the hardware store. Save me a trip later." "Of course," he said. "The gate will be open." Driving back to his neighborhood felt different this time. I was not a victim stumbling upon a crime. I was an operative. The sun was hot. The lawns were green. The houses were silent fortresses of wealth. I pulled my old truck up the long driveway, the gravel crunching under the tires. I could see him through the large plate glass window of his home office, on the phone, his back to me. Perfect. He was distracted, confident his plan was working. I unloaded the heavy ladder and leaned it against the side of the garage, as we had discussed. It was clumsy and loud, a perfect piece of misdirection. While the clatter was still echoing, I walked over to the front porch. It was a wide stone patio with several large potted ferns and a seating area. It was the place where they had plotted against me. I located the spot, a dark space beneath the thick wooden top rail of the porch surround. It was completely out of sight. My heart was beating a steady, heavy rhythm. I knelt down, pretending to tie my shoe. My hand, holding the small recorder, snaped under the rail. The magnet clicked softly against the metal support bracket. It was secure. The entire operation took less than 5 seconds. I stood up, brushed off my knees, and walked back to my truck without a single look back at the house. I did not wave. I did not look in the window. I simply drove away. Waiting for 2 days was the hardest part. I had to let the trap sit. I worked in the shop, the familiar motions of sanding and wiring keeping my hands busy while my mind raced. Adrian called once to say the paperwork was being drawn up and would be ready soon. His voice was buoyant, triumphant. He thought he was closing a deal. He had no idea he was building my case. The hunter was happily walking into the snare, admiring the scenery on his way. Retrieving the device required another lie. I called him on the second morning. Adrian, I'm an old fool. I think my wallet may have slipped out of my pocket when I was dropping off that ladder. Can I come by and take a quick look? He sighed, a sound of pure annoyance, but agreed. Fine, Ernest. The gate is open. Try to be quick. The contempt in his voice was fuel. He already saw me as an inconvenience to be managed, a doddering old man. This time, I walked directly to the porch. I knelt again, ran my hand along the flagstones, then reached up under the rail. My fingers found the small, cool rectangle of the recorder. I slipped it into my pocket and stood up, patting my back pocket. Found it, I called out toward the house, for show. It was in my back pocket all along. Sorry to bother you. I didn't wait for a reply. I was back in my truck and gone in under a minute. Back in the sanctuary of my workshop, I plugged the recorder into my computer. I put on my headphones, closing my eyes, and listened. First, there was only the sound of wind and a distant lawnmower. Then, voices. Adrian and the fixer. They were laughing. He took it, Adrian crowed. He took the 42.5. I swear, it was like taking candy from a baby. He was so grateful. The old fool was actually grateful, but I was robbing him blind. The fixer's wheezing laugh joined his. I told you, they get to that age, they're just waiting for someone to tell them what to do. Then the conversation turned. I've got the title transfer papers ready, the fixer said. But there's 2 signature lines. We'll have him sign the first one. For the second one, I've got a guy who can replicate the signature from the POA document perfectly. No one will ever know. They were openly planning forgery. I saved the file. I uploaded the audio file to the secure server Miss Albright had set up. An hour later, she called me. Ernest, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. This is more than I could have hoped for. This is a clear conspiracy to commit fraud. This moves from a civil matter to a criminal one. There was a pause. But I found something else. Something better. I was reviewing the original deed for Lot 7 Block C. There's a covenant on it I think you've forgotten. And that's when Miss Albright told me about the clause my wife had insisted on 20 years ago. The property isn't just in your name, Ernest, she explained. 15 years ago, your wife had you both sign a quitclaim deed. You transferred the workshop and the adjacent lot into a revocable living trust. The Ernest and Eleanor Vance Trust. Eleanor. Hearing her name felt like a light turning on in a dark room. I remembered the day. The stuffy lawyer's office. I had thought it was just more paperwork. She had known it was a shield. She was a smart woman, Ms. Albright continued. The trust's articles contain a specific provision, Article 4, Section C. It explicitly states that no agent acting under any power of attorney may sell, transfer, or encumber the trust's assets. Only the trustee can do that. And since she passed, you are the sole trustee. The beauty of it was breathtaking. My wife had protected us, had protected me from a threat she never could have predicted with a simple, elegant, legal firewall. The implications were staggering. It meant Adrian's entire plan was built on a foundation of sand. His POA, even if it were still valid, was useless against the trust. The documents he was having me sign were worthless pieces of paper. He wasn't just trying to trick an old man. He was attempting to commit fraud against a legal entity, a much more serious crime, with much more severe consequences. Eleanor had handed me a sword, and I finally understood how to wield it. 2 days later, Adrian sent a courier, a thick envelope containing the sale agreement. He called that afternoon, full of false cheer. "The papers arrive okay, Ernest? I've arranged for a mobile notary to come by your place on August 12th, around 2. We can get it all signed and done. My partner will be there too, just to make sure it all goes smoothly." He was setting the stage for his final performance. "That sounds fine," I said. "Tell him to come." The day arrived, hot and still. August 12th. I spent the morning in the workshop, cleaning, organizing, not out of nervousness, but out of a sense of order. I was restoring balance. At 2:10, a luxury sedan I didn't recognize pulled up my driveway. Adrian got out of the passenger side, the fixer from the driver's. They were both wearing suits that looked too hot for the weather. They looked around at my small house and workshop with disdain. They walked into my workshop as if they already owned it. Adrian was carrying a leather briefcase. The fixer, a thin man with shifty eyes, nodded at me curtly. "Ernest," Adrian said, "all business. Let's get this done." He clicked open his briefcase on my workbench, revealing a neat stack of documents and a pen. "If you'll just sign here, here, and here, the notary will handle the rest, and the money will be in your account by tomorrow." I didn't move toward the papers. I stayed on my stool on the other side of the workbench. In the center of the bench was a small, black speakerphone. "Before I sign anything," I said, my voice calm and even, "I have my lawyer on the line. She just wants to review the terms with us." I pressed the lit button on the device. Adrian's confident smile faltered for the first time. He looked from me to the speakerphone with sudden apprehension. "Good afternoon, Adrian," said Ms. Albright's voice, sharp and clear as glass, filling the quiet space of the workshop. Adrian's face went pale. The fixer took an involuntary step back. "Who is this?" Adrian stammered. "This is my legal counsel," I said. "She has a couple of points of clarification for you before we proceed. Please listen closely." I leaned back on my stool, my hands resting on my knees. The show was about to begin. "The first point," Miss Albright continued, her voice cutting through the tense air, "is regarding the power of attorney you believe you are operating under. That POA, dated 2018, was legally and formally revoked via filing with the county clerk's office 3 days ago at 8:01 a.m. Any action you have taken since that moment in an attempt to represent Ernest's interests constitutes fraud." The fixer was now staring at Adrian, his expression hardening. Adrian sputtered, "That's not possible. I wasn't notified." "Notice is a courtesy, not a legal requirement for revocation," she replied coolly. "But that is actually the secondary issue. The primary issue is that this property, both Lot 7 Block C and the parcel the workshop sits on, does not belong to Ernest Vance as an individual. It is the sole asset of the Ernest and Eleanor Vance Trust." She let the words hang in the air like smoke, according to Article 4, Section C of the Trust's charter. She went on, her pacing deliberate. "No agent acting under any power of attorney, valid or otherwise, has the authority to sell or transfer assets of the trust. Only the trustee has that power. Ernest is the sole trustee. The documents in your briefcase, Adrian, are legally worthless. They are an attempt to defraud a trust." Adrian looked at the papers on my workbench as if they were poison. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small digital recorder. I placed it on the workbench, next to the speakerphone. "I also have a recording," I said quietly, meeting Adrian's horrified gaze. "It's from your porch. The conversation about the lowball offer and about forging signatures on the title transfer. I believe the district attorney's office will find it very interesting." The fixer looked like he was about to be sick. He turned and started walking quickly toward the door. "Don't go anywhere," Miss Albright's voice commanded from the speaker. "The authorities have been notified of this meeting and are likely already on their way." The fixer froze, his hand on the door handle. Adrian stared at me, his face a mask of disbelief and terror. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the raw panic of a cornered animal. All the power he thought he held had vanished into the dusty, pine-scented air of my workshop. It was over. He just didn't know it yet. "You," he whispered, his voice cracking. It was all he could manage. He looked at me, the old fool, the relic he was so sure he could discard. He was seeing me for the first time, not as a father-in-law, not as a project to be managed, but as the man who had just dismantled his entire world, piece by piece, with the same patience and precision I used to build it. He had underestimated the foundation. He had misread the schematic. I said nothing. There was nothing left to say to him. I reached over and picked up the small, half-finished wooden bird from the workbench, the one he had dismissed on his first visit. Its surface was smooth under my thumb. Outside, I could hear the faint, approaching siren. Adrian heard it too. His face crumpled. The sound grew louder, closer, an unavoidable reckoning that was coming for him. The current had been reversed. The fixer made a small, chope sound and put his hands up as if the police were already in the room. Adrian just stood there, paralyzed. The worthless papers from my life spread out before him on the workbench. The sirens were very loud now, stopping just outside. Red and blue lights began to flash through the workshop's windows, painting stripes of color across the pegboard walls and the silent, heavy machinery. He was caught, trapped in the machine he had built. I looked past Adrian, past the flashing lights, to a small framed photo of my wife, sitting on a dusty shelf. Eleanor. Her quiet strength had been the bedrock of my life. Even now, years after she was gone, she was still protecting me, still the smartest person I had ever known. The trap had not been mine alone. It was ours. A final project we completed together, across the years. A quiet promise kept in the language of deeds and trusts. Heavy footsteps sounded on the gravel outside. A sharp knock on the workshop door. Adrian flinched as if struck. His eyes darted between me and the door, searching for an escape that didn't exist. All his money, all his cleverness, all his casual cruelty had led him to this single, inevitable point. The world he had built for himself was about to be rewired permanently. He was about to learn about consequences, a subject he had clearly never studied. He looked at me one last time, a desperate, silent plea. I met his gaze, then turned away from him, picked up my carving knife, and made the first, clean cut into the bird's unfinished wing.